Good evening, everybody, and thank you very, very much for joining Kate and I for tonight's Facebook Live, where we're going to be talking all about gut health and answering all your questions about how to keep yourself healthy from the inside out. So we are super, super excited to have you here. So Kate and I, how many years have we known each other, Kate? Lots.
Oh, it would be giving away age, Claire. Too many good years though.
Yeah, I've known you for a very long time. So Kate and I have known each other. We've got mutual friends that are dietitians that have worked together, and
part of the better part of a decade. And then before that, I knew of you, and we did kind of touch base in a professional sense. But it's been, I think the last 10 years.
Yeah, last 10 years. So Kate is a fabulous dietitian and knows heaps and heaps and heaps around the gut health side of things. So that's what Kate and I are going to be talking to you about tonight. So just to let you know a little bit, Kate and I work together at Mission Nutrition. And for anyone that doesn't know anything about Mission Nutrition, so Mission Nutrition, there's many things that I do in the nutrition world, but Mission Nutrition was what I first set up when I moved to New Zealand in 2005. So Mission Nutrition, we have 18 dietitians and nutritionists that work throughout New Zealand, seeing people one-on-one. We go into businesses, we go into workplaces and do workshops. And everyone that works at Mission Nutrition has a minimum of a 4-year full-time degree and buckets of years of experience. So Kate, you've been a dietitian for over 20 years. I've been a dietitian I trained as a dietitian, now work as a nutritionist, but I'm doing it for over 20 years. So that's all about Mission Nutrition. But I shall now hand over to Kate to let everyone meet you, Kate.
Thank you, Claire. Great introduction. So as Claire mentioned, I've been working in private practice for Mission Nutrition for a number of years. And I suppose before that, many years, I think I graduated in 97, which gives you a bit of an idea about my age. But I've worked as a dietitian since 97 in quite a wide variety of clinical areas, which has been a massive advantage, I think, in helping me work with people. So I find myself now really, really loving the private practice work. And I have certain areas I'm passionate about, one which is gut health. And I also love diabetes and, kind of chronic lifestyle diseases. I suppose part of the journey for me to develop a love of digestive health and understanding how we can best help that is I had a health scare when I was 34. So 12 years ago, I got diagnosed with bowel cancer, completely out of the blue, no family history. I felt a bit cheated, really, because I thought I'd pretty much eaten quite well most of my adult life, and I'd always exercised, and I thought, how could this happen to me? So it spurred a real interest in all things gut health-wise. And the good news is, clear of cancer, totally cured, very, very good. And I love, I guess one of the things I really love doing is helping other people that have not necessarily had, serious health conditions like that, but who are struggling with gut issues or other health issues. Is that enough?
Yeah, that's amazing. Like, you've done some amazing things, and that personal connection it always strengthens, what you're doing when you're working with people and really understanding about it. And I think gut health is kind of like an everyday topic these days. I always think whenever I'm prepping something for TV or thinking about nutrition, I'm always like, what are people talking about in cafes? Because when I do a lot of work in cafes, and I'm like, what are people talking about? And gut health, irritable bowel stuff is hot topic, and I think there's a lot of it's become, well, unfortunately, bowel cancer and all that is not talked about enough. Which Kate and I are always trying to raise the flag for, because bowel cancer affects more people than prostate cancer and breast cancer combined. Yet it gets very little airtime. So we're super passionate about that, but also the irritable bowel stuff, worrying about, is it gluten, is it not, all that kind of, do I have a problem, do I not? So tonight, the way it's going to work is I've got some questions that I'm going to ask Kate, and we're going to go through the common questions about gut health, and make sure, and Kate's going to answer them, as well as that anyone that's got a question, if you have got a question, then just type it in the comments. I'll just check that we are. Yeah, if anyone can type it in the comments. And we've got a copy of my planner to give away, and then I've got 4 healthy food guide cookbooks. So I've got a meals for 1 and 2, family, baking. So add a question into the comments, and yes, we shall be here for you answering those questions. So the first thing we're going to talk about, first of all, is just a bit of an overview of what the gut is. So people talk about gut health, but given that as dietitians and nutritionists, we spend a lot of time understanding the gut and what it is. What actually is the gut, and what is the digestive system, Kate?
That's a big question, Claire.
It is a very big question. You've got 2 minutes.
I think, 2 minutes. The clock starts now. The gut. So the gut is, a perfectly great layman's term to describe the big organ, which is the digestive system. And I think, recently there's been a huge focus on the gut microbiota, which is, the trillions and trillions of microbes that are living in the lower part of our gut, the large bowel or colon. But the gut's so much more than that. And it starts literally in the mouth is the start of the gut, and Uranus is the bottom. So, and within that, there's meters and meters of intestine. And really the functions of the gut can be broken down into 3 main areas: digestion of food, and absorption of nutrients. So that's really the fuel that keeps us alive. Without that, we're pretty much gone. And probably more recently, although I'm not talking about recently in the last year, I'm talking about recently in research, which could be the last 20 years, there's been this real focus on the immune system and a recognition that the gut, that 70% of the immune system cells reside in the gut. So this is relatively new, although, as I say, not just new like in this year, but in terms of research, we now realize that the gut or the digestive system has a large role to play in immunity. So digestion of food, absorption of nutrients, immunity, hormone production, and also a big link with brain communication as well.
Yeah, it's massive, isn't it? And I think I often think that when people are talking about gut, they just kind of think it's this, they go, oh, it's this bit, I've got bloating, I've got this, and it's like, but it's actually remembering that with it starting in your mouth, it affects how do you chew your food. Like, people expect, we scoff food, we're eating on the run, we're going down, and this poor little, I think both Kate and I have been obviously working in hospitals, and you see tubes going in, tubes going out, the insides. It's an amazing organ. It's incredible. And I think when you see what's inside someone's stomach, you'll start chewing your food better, won't you?
Also agree.
Yeah.
I remember, several years ago when we used to actually party, which, was probably...
We don't do anymore.
Won't do that now. I'm by 9 nights. I remember a friend ending up in hospital one night, and he had such severe pain in his gut that he thought, I've got a burst appendix. So what it turned out to be was he'd been out at night, had a few beers. He had gone home via the White Lady, which is a takeaway kind of, I suppose, kiosk in Queen Street, and he had probably inhaled a burger and a big kind of fries without chewing. So he had ended up in hospital with stomach pain. When they actually x-rayed him, they said there's a huge amount of unchewed, really big hunks of food in the intestine. So it does, it really reminds you of why we have teeth. It's important. Yeah. That's where it begins, in the mouth. We have to chew the food well for best digestion.
Yeah, and exactly. And that kind of leads to the first question, is that what is normal and what is not? Because I think that literally, and we've been doing this a long time, and I see all the inquiries that come through at Mission Nutrition, I would say that most people feel that they've got a digestive issue in some reason. So the questions I want to know the answers to, or I'm asking you because I know what the answers are, but we can talk about is like how often is it normal to go to the toilet? Bloating, is some degree of bloating normal for everybody, or is it, do you have irritable bowel when you're bloating? Like, what is normal and what is actually a problem? How do you know the difference?
Such a good question. And there's been a plethora. There's so much information out there. I genuinely think the public is so confused about what's normal and what's not. I think how we answer that question is we begin to look at, what's normal, but also what are some of the signs that things might not be normal for you. So if we look at starting with bowel motions, or, how often you pass a poo, is what's normal. People are obsessed with this. They think that, if you're not doing a poo every single day that meets a 3 or 4 description on the Bristol stool chart, something is wrong. And in actual fact, that is not the case. Mostly, there is no one normal bowel pattern. It can vary. Normal can vary between having 3 bowel motions a day to 3 bowel motions a week. What's more important is what's normal for you. What is your individual pattern? And if that pattern changes for more than 2 weeks, that's when you want to start taking notice of it. So, for example, if your normal pattern is passing a bowel motion once every 2 days, you're not really straining overly, you don't have hard pellets, which is what we would consider constipation, and all of a sudden you start having loose bowel motions twice a day, and that lasts for a couple of weeks, that is what we would consider not normal for you as an individual. And that's what you need to be aware of. So the more intimately you are familiar with your own bowel pattern or your own bowel habit, the faster you'll pick up if something changes and it's not normal. Other things, that people wonder about is the colour of their stools. And really a normal stool colour can vary between, it's shades of brown, shades of browny green. But if you are having bowel motions that are very, very, very dark, almost black, that could indicate blood. Red bowel motions or blood in your stool is never normal. Never normal. It could be that it's simply hemorrhoids. Okay, that's quite a common complaint, but it could also indicate something like inflammatory bowel disease. So, these are the things that need checking out. Another not normal colour for stools is very, very pale or clay coloured. So that may indicate malabsorption of some kind. It could be something to do with your gallbladder, that there's a blockage there. It could be something to do with your liver, your pancreas. It's malabsorption. Now, when we talk about odour, poo smells, it does. Like, I'm sorry, but it just does.
And it's meant, to a degree, it's meant to, yeah.
It's meant to. It's normal for it to smell. So again, if it's really foul and it's a really, really strong, different smell than usual, and you notice that your bowel motions are floating, you might see some oily residue that you didn't notice before, that too may indicate something is wrong, that there is a degree of malabsorption. Potentially something like, this can happen in celiac disease, although in many cases, celiac disease doesn't have any symptoms. So there are some things that you can look at that might indicate to you that things aren't normal. The other things are the alarm symptoms. So these are symptoms you must not ignore. You must go and see your GP or specialist doctor. So if you have had unexplained weight loss of more than about 5% of your body weight in 6 months, no explanation. That needs looking into. As I mentioned before, bleeding or blood in the bowel motion is not normal. Severe pain, the type of pain that might wake you up at night. So you go to sleep, you might have a bit of griping and a bit of wind. That's often very normal for people. But something that is really extreme that wakes you up from a deep sleep in the middle of the night is generally not considered normal. And fever, is also, a high fever and infection is not normal. So, you want to be aware of the things that could be alarm symptoms, but then there's, quite a range of mild gut symptoms that really can be considered normal. Farting. Passing wind. That's actually a sign of the fact that you are feeding your gut.
Oh, we've lost your sound.
You got me now?
Oh yeah, you're back. You're back in the room. Yeah.
It sounded like there was like a little mouse running through the computer. I can't see
It was all the
anything.
talk of farts, Kate. They were like, "What's going on? Oh my
Yeah.
goodness."
So, mostly you will pass 20 farts a day without knowing it, and that's good. And it's a sign because the gut microbiota, the microbiota that lives in the large bowel actually produces gas or wind as a result of breaking down fiber. This is a very good thing. If you suddenly find that you're doing lots of farting and it's accompanied by pain, feeling really sick, nausea, you might think, oh gosh, have I got a tummy bug? So it's usually deviations from what is your normal that would alarm you to thinking, I need to get this investigated.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think, because I do think that people, because irritable bowel and chat, which is common, has been started to talk about, anyone that gets a bit of bloating after a meal feels like I must have some digestive issue. And if you eat a cauliflower based pizza or you eat onion soup or anything like that, I look 6 months pregnant after that. I do not have irritable bowel, but when you're having lots of those foods that are creating lots of excess gas, it is normal to have some degree of extension in your stomach and to need to, but as we'll get to when we talk about irritable bowel, it's, yeah. And, but I do think, that some people think, and then the automatic thing, Kate, isn't it, that you go, oh, it's gluten. It must be gluten. It must have been that gluten that I was eating.
Because there's, there is unfortunately, a huge amount of misinformation that circulates on social media and online websites and that type of thing. And gluten, gluten has got such a bad rap over the years. And I think, what I can relate that to, I think, is yes, gluten is implicated in celiac disease, but celiac disease is really not that common. People think that it is, and that is another thing that really does need a diagnosis. But there's only probably 1% of people that may suffer from celiac disease, not particularly common. And celiac disease is truly a condition where you must avoid gluten. That is, it's an immune condition. But I think, poor old gluten has become a bit of a scapegoat. And there's a lot of probably non-qualified people out there talking about nutrition and health. And they could be selling supplements or they could be selling a service or some kind of fad diet. And if they can hook you onto thinking it's as simple as gluten, and then they may have a solution that they can offer you for X amount of dollars, it really pulls people's attention away from what the real issue is. So yes, you're right. It's much less common that gluten is a problem for a lot of people. There is, shall I touch on the kind of maybe the non-celiac?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, so within the bowel spectrum of disorders, we'll get to irritable bowel next. But one of those things I think is that because the thing with gluten is that a lot of people, when they have a gut disorder, will eliminate gluten and then not go and get tested, and then. But how often is gluten a problem for people with their with a bowel complaint?
So as I mentioned, so in celiac disease, which is an autoimmune condition where the body recognizes gluten as a pathogen, like a foreign protein, a harmful protein.
Yes.
So the body sets up an assault really against gluten, and that damages your gut. And therefore gluten must be avoided in that situation, because if you keep having gluten when you have a celiac diagnosis, it can make you suffer from nutrient deficiencies, malabsorption, even increase your risk of things like bowel cancer. So celiac disease needs the diagnosis. So you would go along to a GP, you get a blood test initially that would show whether or not you had antibodies that would likely indicate you had celiac disease. But before you go down that track, you need to have gluten in your diet, or you won't get diagnosed properly with celiac disease. So don't avoid gluten. Don't self-diagnose. You really need to go and see a GP to get diagnosed. Once there is a suspicion, you've got positive antibodies, that's when you get a biopsy where they actually take a little bit of your small bowel and they have a look at it under a microscope and they say, yes, you have celiac disease. Now, where does gluten fit outside celiac disease? There is probably a number of people. Now, it's really hard to know what percentage it is because a lot of people self-diagnose themselves with a gluten intolerance. Very difficult. There is probably a level of intolerance outside of celiac disease which may make people feel not very good from a digestive point of view. So whether it's actually gluten or whether it's another wheat protein or a carbohydrate associated with wheat is not that clear. So we could say you could term this as non-celiac gluten sensitivity, but it's probably more accurately described as non-celiac wheat sensitivity because there are other proteins in wheat that can cause a bit of a digestive upset in some people. So there's kind of a wheat germ agglutinin, which is a type of protein, another amylase trypsin inhibitor, that's another type of protein, but there's also fructans, which is a type of fermentable carbohydrate, and that is certainly something that people suffer from when they have IBS. So whether it's gluten or whether it's one of these other components is unclear. So
yeah, and I think the fact is that what the problem is when somebody has some kind of gut issue, and then you talk to your neighbour or someone that's selling a supplement, and they'll go, well, just eliminate gluten and dairy and it'll solve all your problems. And one of the challenges is it sometimes can partly help. But the question is, do you permanently need to live like that? Buy all the expensive gluten-free processed products that there are in the market? Do you need to avoid dairy to that extent? Or, one of the things that we do as nutritionists and dietitians is actually work out people's level of tolerance to these foods, because unless you have celiac disease where you have to permanently avoid it, everyone else in the middle, it's about finding the level of tolerance to those foods, but I know that everyone likes black and white, but life is not black and white unless you have celiac disease. And that's obviously, that's what Kate does every single day in her job, is actually help people go, what is the problem? What is not the problem, and how can you go about your life and enjoy your life eating a variety of foods whilst avoiding the ones that are problematic for you, right?
Absolutely. You've hit the nail on the head. And yeah, okay, there may be, let's say there's between 6 and 10 people out there, percent of the total population, who do have a little bit of an intolerance to one of these proteins. Chances are they can still actually include these proteins in their diet. And it's the same with other intolerances like lactose. You don't have to avoid it completely. And in fact, when you do cut these components out of your diet, generally what happens is you cut out entire food groups, and you will have a less diverse diet. You will have less diverse fibres reaching your large bowel, and your risk of a suboptimal nutrient intake is much, much higher. So always want you to eat the widest range of food from as many food groups as you possibly can. And just as you've said, Claire, you work with a dietitian who specialises in helping you assess your individual level of tolerance. And, most people we work with are delighted because they figure out, after they've had some, evidence-based advice, that they don't need to be cutting out.
Restrictive, yes. And I think that's the thing. One of the things, and this is because my passion is psychology, is that psychology of eating is one of the reasons that the whole gluten-free or whatever it might be thing that you just go this way is because when somebody tells you something directly and it's very clear and it's obvious and it's not easy to follow in terms of implementing, but there's a clear black and white line, right? Then you're like, okay, that's good, and you feel like more in control. But by the same token, that is not necessarily the best thing for you or for your health long term, even though you're just being told what to do. So we appreciate that. But one of the things that we see all the time in our profession is people being overly restrictive on things, and then going, screw it, it's Friday, can't be bothered, do it week Friday, Saturday, whatever it is. You don't drink, you're like, I'm not going to drink, I'm not going to eat chocolate, I'm not going to eat gluten, and then you're the first one out getting a pizza, whatever, and then you're like, oh. And actually, when you eliminate things when you don't need to, when you have them again, the symptoms that you get are like way worse than if you just had
Yeah.
a little bit, and as the biggest thing that, Kate and I want to get across is finding this level of tolerance rather than complete exclusion. It's a really important point to get across on that. And actually, with that, Kate, I'll move on actually to we'll come back to the microbiome stuff, but irritable bowel, because literally every second person I meet feels like they've got irritable bowel, and so I guess, what is irritable bowel? How many people have it? And how do we treat it?
So irritable bowel syndrome, and it is relatively common in the spectrum of gut disorders, and it falls into a category of functional gut disorders or functional digestive disorders. And what that means when we say functional, it means that there's nothing sinister, or there's no medical condition that's been found. So really, IBS is a diagnosis of exclusion, Claire. It's not something that you diagnose without having investigations to rule out other things, like celiac disease, or even reflux, for goodness sakes, or stomach ulcers or gastric ulcers. There's other things that can cause these symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome. But irritable bowel syndrome is when the doctors found that there's nothing else to be of concern in your gut that's causing the symptoms. So it is just the way the gut functions is a bit out of tune.
Mm-hmm.
So with the functional gut disorders and with irritable bowel syndrome, the research indicates that it probably is a disorder of the communication between the gut-brain axis. So the gut and the brain communicate via several pathways, to the point where more neurotransmitters are produced in the gut than the brain. And so there's this link. It's a bidirectional communication and link that is happening all the time without us knowing. So we think that probably it's something to do with it, that it's a little bit out of whack, this communication channel between the brain and the gut. And so what happens is people start to have symptoms of IBS, which can include diarrhea or constipation or bloating and cramping, and the motility or movement of the gut can be affected. What do we do about IBS? And I mean, it's probably, IBS, gosh, it's probably 10 to 20% of the population. And it differs, according to different countries, it differs according to the research papers that you look at. It could be around 10 to 20%. So it's significant. And although it's not a sinister health condition in the sense that anything bad is going to happen to you, like if you leave it and you don't do anything about it, it really is debilitating. People find their life is really negatively impacted by these symptoms. And it's not just digestive symptoms, it's fatigue. People are tired, they experience gut pain that can't be attributed to anything that they can necessarily put their finger on. And there can also be other things that, like anxiety and depression, can be associated with it. Whether or not it's because you've got these gut symptoms going on, you feel quite stressed out, or whether or not it's more that the stress makes it worse, we're not quite sure. But from a nutrition perspective, we're really lucky in that the research has kind of exploded in this area, over the past decade or so. And most people would have heard of the Low Fodmap elimination dietary approach, which there's a lot of evidence that this approach can help people with IBS, but you don't necessarily need to go down that approach. I'll talk about what that Low Fodmap approach is, but I also want to talk about what we call first-line dietary strategies. So these are quite, I guess I call it low-hanging fruit. So things that can help IBS where you're not necessarily eliminating a whole lot of easily fermented carbohydrates out of your diet, which can be quite a labor-intensive elimination diet. But things that can help, like chewing your food well, slowing your eating down, avoiding some of the known triggers for symptoms like too much alcohol, too much coffee, spicy foods, certain medications. So regular meal times, the gut loves routine, making sure you're drinking enough water. So there's a lot of first-line dietary strategies which aren't that complicated, where about 50% of people will have an improvement without necessarily then going to the FODMAP, the low FODMAP elimination diet.
Yeah, so and I think that's the thing, is that we often gravitate towards going to the extreme because we live these busy lives and we're eating standing up and we're eating in the car and we're drinking coffee and eating at the same time. And and that's really good to hear that actually sometimes, and certainly some of the most basic things can actually make a profound difference without needing to spend,
absolutely,
buy lots of pills and all the rest of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good news. It's good news for IBS sufferers. And then with the low FODMAP diet, then that's also so basically what are FODMAP? So FODMAP is an acronym for really describing a bunch of carbohydrates in the food that we eat that are easily fermented. So when these carbohydrates reach the large bowel, they feed the good bacteria, they feed the microbes in the bowel, and one of the side effects is gas production. But of course, that is actually a good thing. If you want to look at what does that gas do, it nourishes your gut cells, it helps boost your immunity, it talks back to your brain. So if we look at it simply from a gas point of view, yes, it's annoying, it's bloating, but it's a sign that that your gut microbes are being well fed. So one of the dietary approaches to help reduce symptoms of IBS is to largely reduce, not eliminate completely because it's impossible to do that, but really reduce these fermentable carbohydrates in your diet. And the groups of these carbohydrates are, the common ones. So lactose, which is a milk sugar found in cow's milk, yogurt, sheep's milk, goat's milk. There's the simple sugars like fructose, which is in fruit, honey. There is more kind of complex chains of carbohydrate that we call fructo-oligosaccharides or fructans, which I mentioned before, found in wheat, rye, lots of different veggies, onion, garlic leeks, the things that we often associate with bloating or gas. They're really, really good foods for our microbes, but they don't make us feel so good if we're sensitive to bloating. Then there's galacto-oligosaccharides, which is the legumes, the beans, pulses, that type of thing. So polyols, which is a type of sugar that's really poorly digested, that's found in, it's a carbohydrate rather than a sugar, sorry. It's found in a different variety of fruits, fruit juices, and sweeteners like mannitol, xylitol, sorbitol, the kind of sweeteners that are added to things like sugar-free gum or sugar-free lollies.
And everywhere, I have to say, that is one of the things that I talked about this on when I was talking about protein on breakfast on Wednesday. Like those polyols, like the sorbitol, the mannitol, all those things that now on the back of the packet say, they're high protein, low carb bars, and they get around being low carb because they put these sugar alcohols in them.
Yes.
And they say excessive consumption is a laxative effect. It's like, and actually I did this other one the other day, which was the ice cream department. There is, if you look at the low sugar ice creams, of which there are loads, if you've got irritable bowel, total absolute flipping nightmare, because they are basically 70% of the is mannitol or sorbitol or one of the other ones. Yeah.
Anything that ends in an OL. So really with this low FODMAP diet, the idea is that for around, I suppose kind of, it can vary, but maybe until you have a symptom resolution, so it could be, say, 6 weeks, it might be a bit longer, maybe 6 to 8 weeks. The idea is that you follow a diet that's very low in these fermentable carbohydrates with the idea that you're going to get an improvement in symptoms. Now, that is the elimination phase of that diet. Many people don't realize that is only one part of the treatment, that it's not not designed to follow long term because it's a very limited diet. Once you've done your 6 to 8 weeks, then you reintroduce each group of FODMAPs, kind of one group a week, you could say, in a very structured way with the help of a dietitian who specializes in this. And you then keep a food record which shows if that particular FODMAP group triggers symptoms. So by the end of, say, 6 weeks or a bit longer, you have an idea about which particular FODMAPs cause the biggest problem for you.
Yeah.
And then you can choose how much of that FODMAP you reintroduce into your diet going forward. But all the other FODMAPs that aren't a problem for you, you can eat again. And, you've got the diversity of all the good fibers and all the fermentable carbohydrates actually really good for you. Might not make you feel so good if you get bloated and you get cramping, but the gut microbiome really needs these fibers. We don't want you to go long term on a very low FODMAP diet.
Yeah, and this is the great thing about when you know what you're doing. Even though you're like, oh, do I really need help? But like once you've actually got someone that's actually gone, this is what is, you can actually then have one slice of toast 3 times a week. You can have milk in your coffee and milk, a splash of milk in that, but just don't order a milkshake. You can have, I've got, my husband's got irritable bowel and I've got friends with irritable bowel, but we, don't put a quarter of an onion in or a little bit of the green bit of a spring onion, garlic infusing, put garlic in your oil rather than putting garlic in your pan, so that there's all these different ways where you can work around it rather than the misery of feeling like you have to be on a gluten-free and dairy-free diet. And I think that, going back to your point, Kate, is the reason why anyone with irritable bowel or a bowel complaint often finds that they get better with going gluten-free and dairy-free is because by default they're eliminating wheat and they're eliminating dairy, but
absolutely
you don't have to do that completely. And also gluten and wheat are not the same thing, so you can actually you're eliminating way more foods and potentially eating a lot more processed foods than if you just realized it's wheat that's the problem and I'm fine if I have crackers, but if I have a bowl of pasta it's not so great, and that's the good thing. The diversity, Kate, is just, as you said, like super 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 important.
Yeah, we want people to eat the widest range of foods they can tolerate. Healthy foods, that is.
Healthy foods. So there's a couple of questions, Kate. Sorry, the questions are not popping up on my. I'm having to. If you wonder what I'm doing, looking back, I'm having to look on my own Facebook because they're not popping up on the side of where the screen I'm looking at here. Does sugar affect bloating? Because does white sugar affect bloating?
Probably not as much as people are led to believe, because white sugar is digested much higher up in the intestine. So the small intestine or the small bowel, that's where most of the nutrients from our food are absorbed. And that is where things like sucrose would be absorbed. So largely you're not getting a lot of bloating from those particular types of sugars because they're absorbed higher up the bowel.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's fantastic. So the next question that I have for you is around the general optimization of gut health. So, there are, turn on your TV, look in a magazine, whatever, the thing that people are saying, like, improve your gut health with insert supplement, insert whatever else. But so we've got, is it 2 to 3 kilos roughly? Is that what you'd say? So 2 to 3 kilograms of bacteria that are living inside here, which we need to keep healthy, right?
Yes.
And the microbiome, the way I always describe the microbiome, is like a rainforest, isn't it? And everything, like in a rainforest, you can't just remove one thing and then expect that, everything kind of combines and works together. It's very, very important that everything's working in harmony in the environment. It's an environment in there. So from your point of view, what are the best things that people can do to optimize their gut health?
Well, it's such a good question. And you know what the good news is? It's quite simple. And when I say simple, I don't mean easy, because, no lifestyle changes are super, super easy to make unless you love it. But what I mean is, you don't have to go and buy supplements. You don't have to spend lots of money in health food shops. So by far and away, the most important thing that the research is consistent about is the higher diversity of plant foods you eat. So the greater the range of plant-based foods in your diet, the more nourishment you're giving that microbiota that's living inside of you, which effectively is almost like another organ in itself with all the functions that it does. So lots of different, like diverse plant foods. So, try and aim to get, you know, 20 or 30 different types of plant foods in your week. So have some fruit, have lots of veggies of different varieties, nuts, seeds. Make sure you have some pulses like your legumes, chickpeas, lentils, as you can tolerate. You don't have to eat an entire can in one sitting. But if you few chickpeas on a salad, for example, you're boosting the array of fiber it's giving you. So that's really, really, really important. So as well as the plant foods, we also, the good old Mediterranean diet. There's been so much research done around the Mediterranean diet, and what sets that apart from other types of diets is that it's so associated with health benefits. So when you look at, yes, lots of different plant foods, olive oil is great. Have some fish. Don't have too much meat. Don't load yourself up with too much protein and fat. One of the, I suppose, the really popular types of diets that we've seen are these very high fat, high protein diets. Well, we know that very quickly when people change to very high protein, high fat diets, the diversity of their gut microbiota changes. It becomes a lot less diverse. So it's like that rainforest. You had 500 species of different plants in that rainforest, and then something happened and the environment changed, and now you've got 100. The rainforest is not healthy, nearly as healthy as it was before. Yeah. So diet, genetically, our genetics do influence our gut microbiota, but actually our environment and what we put into our bodies is much more important. So diet is very important. But it's not just diet. There's non-diet things. Exercise boosts microbiota. So people that exercise regularly and have got a normal kind of in the healthy weight range have more diverse microbiomes in their gut than people that don't exercise. So, there's complex interactions going on here. The other thing is sleep. People that have disturbed sleep often have a different, less diverse range of microbes in their gut. So get that sleep. Sleep is really important. And stress. So if you have unmanaged stress in your life and you're producing stress hormones, some of those stress hormones over the long term can influence the gut microbes. So cortisol, adrenaline, I'm really stressed, I'm not happy, I'm not sleeping well. Yeah. Those things will damage the diversity of the gut bacteria. So a good diet with a big range of plant-based foods, and that's fiber really. Getting your exercise in, managing your stress, getting good sleep. Those things are probably the most important thing to keep your gut healthy.
Gut healthy. And I think it's really interesting because even though we are trained, we are trained as dietitians and nutritionists, right? We do these full-time degrees studying nutrition, but the longer that we do this as a job, we when we work with people, and this is why, as qualified professionals, we actually look at the person as a whole, because one of the challenges in nutrition at the moment, when you're trying to get advice from someone about nutrition, is if you take advice from someone that's just tried something that's worked for them, then they're not necessarily looking at the bigger picture of you and what works for a 6'2", 120 kilo guy from the gym is not, for you at 70 kilos when you've had a history of cancer and this and that and whatever else, and you're not sleeping well, and you've got it. So one of the things that both Kate and I do, and we all do at Mission Nutrition, is we really look at you as a whole person, because you're not just your food. And if we also, Kate and I work a lot if you're not sleeping properly, you're not going to eat properly. So if you're not, if you know, a lot of the time you actually sometimes work through those different things first to get the solution off the back of that. But yeah, I mean, and on the fibre conversation, to reiterate what Kate was saying, you know, in New Zealand we have on average 20 grams of fibre a day. Ladies, you need 28 grams. Guys, 38 grams. So 20 grams is not going to cut it. I'll share a link in the comments with some a fibre thing for you, just to say, just while I remember. Kate has done a handout for today, and I post it in the comments. So if you want Kate's top tips, oh, there you go, from today, she's written the kind of key points in there. So one person just asked a couple of questions. Could my low iron be related to a gut problem, and will going gluten-free help?
So the first part of that question, could your low iron be related to a gut problem? Yes, it could. And how that might be the case is there are different mechanisms. So if, for example, you had some blood loss through your gastrointestinal tract, so for example, inflammation somewhere, like, somewhere in the gut. It could be inflammation even in the stomach. It could be, some people have little ulcers that they're not even aware they have that bleed. Other people have things like inflammatory bowel disease, where you will get some blood loss through the gut, and that can affect your iron levels. So there is that. The other, I suppose, thing that can affect your iron levels is if you're malabsorbing the minerals and nutrients from food. And there's a few different things. It's really beyond the scope of kind of going into the nitty gritty with that now, but I think if it's an ongoing issue with which doesn't have an explanation, like for example, some women have extremely heavy periods and they regularly have low iron levels because of that. But if it's something that you really don't have an explanation for, it's always worth getting it checked out. Yes, it could be related to a gut condition, but it also may not be. So you need to head along to see your GP.
Yeah, and I think the most important thing is if you are struggling with this, self-diagnosis can cause as many problems as it solves.
And it can stop you finding the real issue. And I think that's the big thing. I mean, there's been countless people I've seen who have been struggling along with gut issues, going down a completely different track from something that they've perhaps Googled and decided that that's what it was. When I've seen them and with help from their GP, we've actually found it's been something completely different. So
yeah.
So it's really important not to do that self-diagnosis thing.
Yeah, and actually the link between the woman's health and the gut thing is quite interesting. Like Sarah and I, so Sarah also works in Mission Nutrition. I think she said that over 90% of people with endometriosis, for example, have irritable bowel. And like there's the link between, but by the same token, the number of people that she has seen that have thought they are gluten intolerant, whatever else it might be, but actually it was endometriosis that they had. And it's not until you work with somebody that goes, hang on a minute, that's not normal. And it's just, I come from a family of doctors, right? And I'm bigs up to doctors. My dad's a doctor, my brother's a doctor, I've got a full medical family but doctors have varying degrees of nutrition knowledge. So this is not down, I love doctors fully, but just be my dad trained as a doctor, my brother is trained as a doctor. They did like a week's worth of nutrition in their degree. We train full time for 4 to 5 years, and it's constantly up to date. So if you're not getting the answer from your GP, then either try another GP, or you can go to a dietitian, because it's just about finding the right person to talk. And it's not I've got a great GP that knows lots about nutrition, does some really good, but it's not their fault. You can't be a master of everything.
Right. And I think that point, you're absolutely right. And so when I mentioned the GP, so basically the role of the GP is to rule out a medical condition that that may need a diagnosis. And look, in the worst case, it could be that they send you along for a colonoscopy and they find something that doesn't look great. But I agree with you that GPs are great, but they're not nutrition specialists. So really the role of the doctor is to ensure that there's nothing more serious going on. Yeah, and then you your dietitian and get a second opinion. Get a second opinion if you don't feel that someone's listening to you. Ask to work with a dietitian, ask for a referral. I mean, a lot of GPs kind of forget perhaps that there are dietitians out there that work in these areas. And we're really keen to help you out if we can.
Yeah, and get to, pardon the pun, I was going to say get to the bottom of it, but I mean, and that's a lot of it is what it's about. And also the thing, there was the couple of questions actually about children's bowel health, which has come up here. Around one question was around getting enough fibre into children. I mean, children's bowel habits can be all over the place. I mean, they really can. They're very sensitive, aren't they?
Yeah, and that's really kind of a different area, because children are not little adults when it comes to things like fibre. They do need some fibre. I think we talk less about fibre as a nutrient and more about food. So with children, it's getting as much variety in their diet as you can without creating a battle. If there's things like constipation, it may not be a fibre thing with children. It could actually be something behavioural. So they're learning that if they go to the toilet, they're associating it with pain, for example, and then they're holding on and they might be becoming constipated. Yeah. So it can be, it's about food and fluid with children and movement and exercise, but it can actually be that there's other things going on that they're relating to, and children that don't go when the urge happens. So, when they actually get the urge to pass a bowel motion, if they can't go right then and there and they hold on, then that urge may not come back for another day. And so what you're doing is you're getting this poo that's getting progressively more and more dried out in the lower bowel and in the rectum, and it becomes difficult. So it might not just purely be a fibre thing. So again, that can be a good thing. And in actual fact, pediatric dietitians work with bowel health in children all the time. So if they're younger children, that could be the way to go.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say, I mean, I'm in this spectrum where I've got a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. So I've got lots of friends with young children. That one of the things to be aware of is that if they are constipated, not just to go straight to fibre, because you can actually make it worse. Like, don't get me wrong, have more fruits and vegetables, look at brown rice, that kind of thing. But, like starting on large or getting a fibre supplement from the supermarket and putting your child on that, because like you said, a lot of the time they don't drink enough water. So a lot of children are just dreadful at drinking enough water, and then you shove more fibre in there without enough water, and the bowel just goes, and it just you actually making the problem worse, aren't you, literally? And you've got this bunged up child. Yeah, the behavioural thing is a really big one, particularly when they start school or they don't know where they're going, or they start something new and they don't know where they've got to go to the toilet, so they hold on and then they're not sure, and then someone shames them, or they go to the toilet and don't wipe the bum, whatever. It's like it's a minefield, but it is if you've got kids with gut issues, it is worth kind of getting it. Yeah, getting help with it, because it can be it also can be extremely emotionally and stressful when they've got a lot of pain. And that kind of thing. So that's definitely not a normal thing. And the other thing, so I mean, obviously there's things like diverticulitis is something that seems to be coming up more and more, Kate. So there's the other issues of I mean, is diverticulitis common? Is it?
It's very common, and particularly as we get older, diverticulitis tends to be a more common condition. And so the large bowel, which is around 2 meters long, in actual fact, we call it the large bowel, but it's the shorter part of our intestine. Most of the intestine is the small bowel, but in the large bowel, which is effectively a big long muscle, and what happens is the movement of the bowel, which is the peristaltic waves that move food through our gut and out the other end. So once those waves move to the large bowel, whatever you've got sitting in your rectum, which is the stool being formed, gets passed out, so that you get the urge, you kind of, oh, okay, need to go to the toilet. So what happens as people get older, the muscles in the bowel can get a little bit weaker and lose a bit of tone, but also constipation can be a little bit more common in older people past a certain age, and that could be to do with a bit of dehydration, maybe not quite enough exercise, maybe the fibre in the diet's changed. And when you get, I suppose, smaller stools where the bowel is a little bit more lax and more pressure has to be applied to actually get that stool out of your body, you can develop these little pouches that blow out a little bit really in the gut wall. And diverticulosis can affect a very small part of your bowel, little out pouches really, or it can be more extensive, but it's towards the bottom of the bowel. And many people don't know they've got it, and it may not cause any symptoms for many people, but for some people, the little pouches get infected and inflamed.
Yeah.
And that can cause a lot of distress, inflammation. People often start with a bit of a stomach crampy pain, a bit of bloating, might get a bit of diarrhea, thinking, start to feel a bit hot, get a fever, and then need to go to their GP. So some people actually need antibiotic treatment when they get a proper flare-up of diverticulitis, which is inflammation. Yeah. Other people can manage diverticulosis, which is the non-inflamed, that's just the little pouches without getting inflamed, by enough fibre or building fibre slowly in your diet, exercise, moving your body, plenty of fluid. If you find that that's not enough, you can get fibre supplements. Again, it does need to be really by talking to a dietitian or GP. There are fibre supplements or other laxatives that can be given to you if lifestyle measures don't work.
Yeah. That's great. And it's these things that I think one of the things with bowel things is because it is talking about poos and gas and whatever else, because we're trained as dietitians and nutritionists, we talk about this all the time. So we think it's kind of normal, but we also appreciate that because it's kind of a bit of a taboo topic that often you kind of think people leave it. And this is why bowel cancer is such a problem, because people leave it too long. And it's just better to kind of definitely get these things checked. So my last question for you, Kate, is about prebiotics and probiotics. So obviously one of the things we talked about is improving bowel health, but when we see on the television, or in any magazine or whatever else, the most common thing that you will see associated with improving bowel health is taking a probiotic, or now there's prebiotic supplements. So are they worth it? What do they do? And how do we choose?
So, yeah, again, a big subject and a really, really valid question. So let's start with what are probiotics. So probiotics are it's a term for beneficial microbes, which are largely bacteria, but can be other types of microbes like yeast, certain yeasts and things, that are able to be consumed by a human in large quantities and that need to survive the digestive process. So they need to actually be able to survive the transit through the very acidic stomach, and they need to reach out, and they need to kind of live there, really. They need to say to the rest of the rainforest, hey, this looks like a nice place to live. I might, put my roots down here and stay. So for something to be called a probiotic, there are specific criteria. So not all microbes are probiotics. So where do we find them? And there's a lot being marketed in supplements. So you can find probiotic supplements of many different strains, hundreds and hundreds of different strains. And probiotics are really marketed, I suppose, as having health benefits. And we don't really think that mostly if you're healthy, you would benefit from probiotic supplements. There are certain conditions that there has been some limited research that looks quite promising. So, for example, if you're being treated with antibiotics for an infection or for eradicating a bacteria in your stomach that's quite commonly a cause of gastritis and ulcers, H. pylori, it's called, that if you take a certain strain of probiotics before and after the antibiotic treatment, that can certainly be beneficial in terms of helping maintain the balance of bacteria in your gut, and may even make the antibiotics more effective. So that antibiotic-associated diarrhea can be a time where you may benefit from taking probiotics. In IBS, in certain cases, individuals with IBS may, if they've tried everything else, and I would put all the other things we've talked about much, much further up the priority list. But if you have IBS and you've tried everything and you've genuinely given it a go, and you still feel that, you're not happy with your symptoms, you could trial specific strains of probiotics that may have a benefit for IBS, about maybe 20% of the overall benefit. So it's not huge. So yes, and there's more research being done, but I mean, I would probably, for my money, I would put it into food. Making sure you're getting the prebiotics that you need. So what are prebiotics? They are foods that have a specific beneficial effect on good microbes in our gut. So these foods, it's mostly fibers, and there's, I think, 35,000 different plant species that contain prebiotic fibers. These fibers, prebiotics, specifically boost the good microbes. So they're very powerful and potent plant-based foods. So that is an easy win. We know prebiotics are, there's convincing evidence that prebiotics are a good thing to be including regularly. So some things that you can regularly consume, let me throw a few out there for you. Fruit like apricots, dates, nectarines, grapefruit, watermelon, figs, for example. Veggies like Brussels sprouts,
They've got to have something good in them, Kate. They've got to.
That's why we used to get forced to eat them. Our grandparents,
there was something good in them.
Science, they knew. So leeks, again, garlic, onions, the things that we sometimes associate with gas, and nuts. So get some almonds and some cashews and hazelnuts. But even things like rye, so gluten-containing grains can be a very powerful source of prebiotics. So there you go. Cutting out gluten, it means you don't get these prebiotics from these grains. And of course, our beans. Beans are great. Yes, they do produce a bit of gas, but they're wonderful food for the beneficial bacteria. So they have a specific microbe boosting effect.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's just going back to the whole gluten grain thing is I feel like when we say like, you don't need to necessarily avoid gluten, that does not mean that as dietitians and nutritionists we are suggesting that everyone starts eating white fluffy bread, loads of white pasta and donuts. We're just saying maybe it's okay to eat some of the whole grain versions of those products that are minimally processed,
intact whole grains,
intact whole grains, exactly. We're not saying start eating French sticks by the whole load.
Stone ground wheat, rye, barley. Wow. I mean, amazing whole grains. Like, we know that things like bowel cancer, for example, there is, very, very strong evidence that things like whole grains have a powerful risk-reducing effect for bowel cancer. Now, if you cut out whole grains, there are other disease processes that you could inadvertently be not protecting yourself from. So balance and variety, we go
is where it's at. Yeah. And barley, good old barley. And the other thing is I talked about the topic of immunity actually a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about supplements, and this is the same kind of thing, is that when someone's trying to boost their immunity at this time of year, the first thing that people think about is probably vitamin C. I'll take vitamin C supplement, I'll take my echinacea. But it's like, you've got to think about the probiotics or the supplement or as like not even the cherry on the cake. It's like the sprinkles next to the cherry on the cake. Like, but if you do not have a cake and you do not have lots of creamy, delicious ice cream and you don't have a cherry, the sprinkles are a bit like, yeah, why would I bother buying the sprinkles? But the problem is we spend a lot of time and energy on the sprinkles. And because we buy the sprinkles, we're like, oh, you actually do get some benefit psychologically because you feel like you're ticking. But the sprinkles are flipping expensive. And we spend money and time on that. And one of the problems is people make their businesses out of selling you the sprinkles.
Yeah, they do. They do. And that's good. Everyone, I mean, business is important and people's livelihood is important. But the most, information is always key. So educate yourself from the right information sources, evidence-based, see the people who know what they're talking about. And, it's like, don't build a house on a foundation of sand. That's, that's what gut health is like to me. It's like you have to have the solid foundation and the priorities first before you would go down something like, a probiotic track, for example. And that's the tough stuff for people because
it's harder. It's harder work, and it requires changing your behaviour, and we fully acknowledge that. And from a psychological point of view, I fully understand that people that requiring habit change. Yeah, but if you're gonna change, like you said,
do the things that count.
Do the things that count and that actually make changes on multiple levels. Because for a great cake, you need cake, icing, cherry, sprinkles, like the whole shebang. Yeah. We've covered a whole heap of things. So just to let you all know, I will go through the comments and pick some winners and let you know the winners. I have just when I was looking weird like this in the camera, it was because I was trying to go on Facebook and I was changing it to put the link to the handout. So the handout should be in the top of the post, as well as like about 300 times in the comments where I was trying to do it while we were going. So the handout is there. If you want to know any more about Kate or how we can help you, then you just missionnutrition.co.nz. But other than that, Kate, thank you so much for your time this evening, and thank you everybody for your time and being here and sitting with us, and we will definitely talk to you again soon. So thanks very much.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much, Claire. Bye.
See you later. Bye.